Chapter 1. The Abyssal Citadel. The Abyssal Citadel loomed before them like a living nightmare, its blackened stone walls pulsating with malevolent energy. The sky above was a swirling vortex of darkness, a storm of shadow that blotted out the stars. The air was thick with the scent of decay, each breath filled with the oppressive stench of rot. Aya, Kyle, Lyra, Astra, and Nyx stood at the base of the towering structure, their hearts pounding in unison as they prepared to face the ultimate evil. The path leading to the citadel was treacherous, lined with twisted, gnarled trees, whose branches seemed to reach out like skeletal fingers, grasping at the group as they passed. The ground was uneven, slick with a dark, viscous substance that clung to their boots, pulling at them as if the abyss itself was trying to drag them down. As they stepped into the citadel's entrance, an unnatural cold seeped into their bones, chilling them to the core. The walls of the corridor absorbed all light, creating a suffocating darkness that even Astra's ethereal glow struggled to penetrate. Kyle's flames flickered weakly, the fire almost afraid to burn in this place. Every sound echoed ominously in the hollow, cavernous halls, their footsteps, their breathing, even the occasional drip of unseen liquid from the ceiling. The citadel seemed alive, aware of their presence and eager to consume them. Finally, they reached the heart of the citadel, a vast, cavernous chamber where the Abyssal Sovereign awaited them. The creature's form was a nightmarish amalgamation of shadows, its body shifting and writhing as if it were composed of living darkness. Its eyes were voids, pits of endless blackness that seemed to draw in the very light around them, and its mouth was a jagged maw filled with teeth like shards of obsidian. "You dare to challenge me in my domain?" The Sovereign's voice echoed, low and resonant, carrying with it a deep-seated terror. "You are nothing but insects before the abyss." Aya's heart pounded in her chest, the Sovereign's presence radiating a palpable fear that threatened to break her resolve. But she steeled herself, forcing the terror aside as she drew upon the light within her. This was their only chance, and she would not let the darkness win. The group launched their attacks, but the Sovereign's power was overwhelming. Every strike they made seemed to be absorbed by the darkness, their energy dissipating into the void. The creature retaliated with a wave of shadow, a blast of cold that sucked the warmth from their bodies and threatened to extinguish their very souls. The floor beneath them began to crack and crumble, the entire citadel shaking violently as if the structure itself were trying to tear them apart. The Sovereign's laughter filled the chamber, a deep, hollow sound that reverberated through the stone and sent chills down their spines. "The Sovereign is destabilizing the entire structure," Astra shouted, her voice strained with effort. "If we don't stop it now, we'll all be buried alive." Before they could react, the ground gave way beneath them, and they plunged into the darkness below, the Sovereign's laughter echoing in their ears. Chapter 2. Descent into Darkness. Aya awoke to a suffocating cold and the hard, unforgiving surface of stone beneath her. The fall had left her bruised and battered, her body aching from the impact. She blinked, trying to adjust her eyes to the darkness that surrounded her. The chamber they had fallen into was vast, a gaping void filled with an oppressive silence that pressed in on her from all sides. "We're still alive." Kale's voice came from somewhere in the darkness, his tone a mix of relief and exhaustion. He helped Aya to her feet, his hand trembling slightly as he steadied her. "But we're deep, deeper than I thought possible." The group gathered themselves, checking for injuries and taking stock of their surroundings. The air was thick with an eerie stillness, broken only by the occasional distant drip of water or the soft rustle of something moving in the shadows. This place, it's like the abyss itself, has seeped into the very stone, Lyra whispered, her voice tinged with fear. Her normally vibrant eyes were dull, reflecting the hopelessness that seemed to permeate the air. "We have to keep moving," Astra said, though her usual confidence was tempered by the sheer malevolence of the place. "The Sovereign is still out there, and if we don't stop it, this world will be consumed." As they ventured further into the labyrinthine corridors, the atmosphere grew more oppressive, the walls pulsating with dark energy. The shadows seemed to move on their own, shifting and twisting in the corners of their vision. Occasionally, they would catch glimpses of figures, ghostly apparitions that would vanish the moment they tried to focus on them. The deeper they went, the more Aya felt the darkness trying to invade her mind, whispering terrible things in a language she didn't understand but could feel in her very soul. The others seemed to feel it too. Kale's fire dimmed, Lyra's usually steady hands trembled, and even Astra's ethereal light flickered uncertainly. Finally, they reached the core of the Citadel, a massive chamber filled with a pulsating, writhing mass of darkness. It was as if the abyss itself had taken root here, growing and spreading like a malignant tumor. In the center of the chamber, the Abyssal Sovereign awaited them, its form now even more grotesque and terrifying, as though it had fed on the darkness around it. "You've come far, but your journey ends here," the Sovereign hissed, its voice now a low, guttural growl. "You will be devoured by the abyss, your souls twisted into my eternal darkness." The battle began again, but the Sovereign's power was even greater in this dark, twisted place. It attacked with relentless ferocity, its tendrils of shadow striking out like living whips, tearing through the air with a sound like tearing flesh. Aya fought back with all her might, drawing on the light within her, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a candle. The darkness was relentless, pushing them back, forcing them to the edge of despair. The chamber shook violently as the Citadel began to collapse around them. Stones fell from the ceiling. The ground cracked beneath their feet, and the air was filled with the deafening roar of destruction. The Sovereign unleashed a final, desperate attack, a wave of darkness so intense that it seemed to blot out all light, and in the chaos, Aya felt herself losing control. "Hold on," Kyle shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. But it was too late. The ground beneath them gave way, and they were plunged into an even deeper abyss, the Sovereign's laughter echoing in the darkness. Chapter 3: Abyssal Depths. They awoke in a place that defied all logic and reason, a void where the darkness was so absolute that it seemed to have a physical presence, pressing down on them with a suffocating weight. The air was cold, so cold that it burned their lungs with every breath, and the silence was so profound that it felt as though the very world had ceased to exist. "We're in the heart of the abyss," Astra said, her voice barely a whisper, as though speaking any louder might provoke the darkness into action. Her normally bright, ethereal glow was dim, struggling to pierce the thick, suffocating shadows that surrounded them. The group moved through the darkness, each step slow and deliberate, as if the very ground beneath their feet might vanish at any moment. The walls seemed to close in on them, twisting and writhing, as though they were alive, and the shadows seemed to follow their every move, growing thicker and more menacing the deeper they went. Twisted creatures emerged from the shadows, born from the abyss itself. They were horrifying abominations, creatures that defied description, their bodies twisted and malformed, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. Nyx, now fully corrupted by the darkness, fought with a savage intensity, its body moving with a fluid grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. As they fought their way through the endless darkness, their hope began to dwindle. The abyss was relentless, pressing in on them from all sides, and with each passing moment, the light within Aya grew weaker, her strength fading as the darkness tried to consume her. Finally, they reached a massive chasm, a void so deep and so black that it seemed to stretch into infinity. On the other side of the chasm was a gateway, a shimmering portal that pulsed with dark energy, the only thing standing between them and the Abyssal Sovereign. The Sovereign awaited them there, its form now even more monstrous and twisted, its body a grotesque mass of shadows and writhing tendrils. "You've made it this far," the Sovereign said, its voice filled with dark amusement. "But this is where your journey ends. The abyss will consume you all." Aya could feel her strength slipping away, the light within her growing dim as the abyss closed in around them. But she knew that they had no choice but to face the Sovereign one final time. With a determined nod to her friends, she stepped forward, ready to confront the darkness head-on. Chapter 4. The Final Confrontation. The battle against the Abyssal Sovereign was like fighting against a living nightmare. The creature's power was overwhelming, its attacks relentless and brutal. Every strike it made sent shockwaves of darkness through the chamber, shaking the very foundations of the Citadel. The shadows moved as if alive, twisting and writhing around them, seeking to entangle and devour them. Aya could feel the Sovereign's malevolent will pressing down on her, a crushing weight that threatened to extinguish the last flicker of light within her. Her body ached with exhaustion, her mind teetered on the edge of despair, but she refused to give in. She had to keep fighting, for her friends, for the world, and for the light that still burned within her. Drawing on the last of her strength, Aya unleashed a powerful wave of starlight, her attack slicing through the darkness and striking the Sovereign with all her might. The creature roared in pain, its form shuddering as the light tore through it. But instead of weakening, the Sovereign absorbed the darkness around it, growing larger and more monstrous, its body warping into an even more terrifying shape. "We're losing," Lyra shouted, her voice filled with despair as she barely dodged a tendril of shadow that lashed out at her. Her once steady hands now shook with fear, the reality of their situation pressing down on her like a suffocating weight. "We can't hold out much longer." Kyle gritted his teeth, his flames flickering weakly as the darkness pressed in on him. "We have to keep fighting. We can't let it win." But it was a losing battle. The Sovereign's power was too great, the darkness too overwhelming. Aya could feel herself slipping away, the light within her growing fainter with each passing moment. The shadows seemed to close in on her, whispering terrible things in her ear, promises of despair and eternal darkness. Just when all hope seemed lost, Astra stepped forward, her eyes blazing with ethereal energy. "There's one last chance," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear that lurked beneath. "We have to seal the abyss, but it will require a great sacrifice." Aya looked at her, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Astra, no." But Astra was resolute. "This is the only way. I have the power to do it, but I need you all to give me your strength." With no other options, the group gathered around Astra, channeling their remaining energy into her. The ethereal light within Astra grew brighter, pushing back the darkness until it was almost blinding. The Abyssal Sovereign let out a final desperate roar as Astra unleashed her power, the light tearing through the darkness, sealing the rift that connected their world to the abyss. The Sovereign's form began to disintegrate, its power unraveling as the light consumed it, its final scream a haunting echo that reverberated through the collapsing chamber. But as the Sovereign was defeated, the Citadel began to collapse around them. The ground shook violently, and the walls crumbled, threatening to bury them all. The air was filled with the deafening roar of destruction, and the temperature plummeted as the darkness that had sustained the Citadel was torn away. With the last of her strength, Astra created a portal, a shimmering gateway of light that would lead them back to the surface. "Go!" she shouted, her voice filled with urgency. "I'll hold the rift open long enough for you to escape." But as they made their way to the portal, the ground beneath them cracked and splintered, the rift closing faster than expected. The light from the portal flickered, growing dim as Astra's power waned. Aya made a split-second decision, grabbing Astra's hand and pulling her toward the portal. "We're not leaving you behind." But as they reached the portal, the floor beneath them gave way, and the light began to fade. Aya felt herself being pulled into the darkness, her hand slipping from Astra's grasp. She watched in horror as Astra's face filled with determination and sorrow, knowing that she would not be able to hold the rift open much longer. The last thing Aya saw, before everything went black, was Astra's form, glowing with the last remnants of ethereal light, as she sacrificed herself to save them. Chapter 5. Aftermath and Awakening. Aya awoke to the sound of rushing water and the feel of soft grass beneath her. She blinked against the bright sunlight that filtered through the trees, the warmth of the sun, a stark contrast to the cold darkness they had just escaped. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of earth and flowers, a reminder that they had returned to the world of the living. But as she sat up and looked around, her heart sank. Kale, Lyra, and Nyx were there, their expressions a mix of relief and sorrow, but Astra was nowhere to be seen. The memories of their final moments in the Abyssal Citadel flooded back. Astra's sacrifice, the collapsing rift, and the darkness that had nearly consumed them all. "Astra!" Aya called out, her voice filled with desperation as she scrambled to her feet. "Where are you?" Kyle placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his expression grim. She didn't make it, Aya. She sacrificed herself to seal the rift. If she hadn't, we'd all be trapped in the abyss." Aya's heart ached with grief, tears welling up in her eyes. She had known Astra was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice, but the reality of it was almost too much to bear. The world was safe, but it had come at a terrible cost, a cost that weighed heavily on her soul. As they sat there, processing the loss, a faint light appeared in the distance, a soft, ethereal glow that pulsed gently in the twilight. The light grew brighter, and from it emerged a figure cloaked in ethereal energy. It was Astra, but her form was different, no longer solid, but instead an ethereal, almost ghostly apparition. "Astra," Aya whispered, her voice trembling with emotion, as she reached out a hand toward her. Astra smiled, her eyes filled with a gentle light that was both familiar and distant. "I'm not gone, Aya," she said, her voice a soft echo that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The abyss couldn't take me, but I can't stay in your world either. I'm somewhere in between." Aya's heart swelled with both relief and sadness. "But what does that mean? Can you come back?" Astra shook her head slowly, her form flickering slightly, as if she was struggling to maintain her presence. "I can't return fully. The sacrifice I made, binds me to the abyss, but I'll be watching over you all, guiding you as best I can from beyond the veil. You must continue without me, but know that I will always be with you in spirit." As she spoke, the light around her began to fade, the connection growing weaker. Aya felt a pang of fear and loss, reaching out as if to hold on to Astra for just a moment longer. "Stay strong, Aya," Astra said, her voice a fading whisper. "The darkness may be powerful, but the light within you is stronger. Never forget that." With those final words, Astra's form dissolved into the twilight, leaving behind only a soft, lingering glow that gradually faded into the night. Aya stood there, tears streaming down her face, feeling both the weight of their loss and the hope that Astra had left behind. The battle was over, but the scars would remain, a reminder of the darkness they had faced and the light that had ultimately prevailed. As the group stood together, gazing up at the starry sky, they knew that their journey was far from over. The world was vast, filled with both light and shadow, and though the Abyssal Sovereign had been defeated, other challenges awaited them. But for now, they took a moment to grieve, to remember Astra's sacrifice, and to find solace in the knowledge that even in the darkest of places, the light would always find a way to shine. And as they turned to leave, Aya couldn't help but feel that somewhere, just beyond the veil, Astra was still watching over them, her light guiding their way through the darkness.